Yeah, look, it started out certainly as a negotiating ploy, but I think the fallout to the stock and the bond market, both falling at the same time, which was very unusual. I think when the markets puked and the bond market started to blow up, he hit reverse. To me, it's pretty plain and simple. And I'm conflicted over the whole thing because on one end, I agree there are some imbalances and there is a level of unfairness just at the surface when you're talking about tariffs and free trade, so-called free trade. On the other hand, the idea that the world should pay tariffs for the privilege, much of this is not to support our manufacturing industry. It's bigger than that. And look, on the other hand, which is the part that not enough people are talking about, is that those same countries, they're keeping our system afloat by buying our treasuries, and they're using the dollar as the world reserve currency. This keeps rates low. This keeps asset prices high. This keeps goods cheap. So sure, the trade gap looks ugly on paper, Jesse, but is it really? Is the advantage that we get by being the reserve currency and having all of these countries recycle their reserves into treasuries, which maybe not doing so much anymore because of our behavior, is something to question. Is it fair to have both sides, right? So on one end, yeah, we have a trade imbalance, looks that way, but on the other end, these countries are supporting our standard of living and have for a long time. So look, tearing it all down without understanding the plumbing and how this will all unfold is not, to me, the art of the deal. It's more along the lines of maybe economic Russian roulette. Yeah, what we saw in just a period of 3 days was unparalleled. We saw the yield on the 10-year Treasury shoot up 60 basis points at the same time the stock market or the S&P 500 dropped by 8 or 9%. I'm not exactly sure the number, but I do know that it was the biggest jump in bond yields over 3 days since I think 1982. But one of the sharpest, if not the sharpest, splits ever between bonds and stocks. If stocks are falling, that means people should be running to safety into the arms of the Uncle Sam and to the Treasury, which should push yields down, but instead yields went up. And I guess I would say, honestly, this could become very bad for the bond market. And it's less about um, what had happened with other countries dumping treasuries. The rumor is Japan did dump a bunch, but it's more about this thing called the basis trade, which is a trade that hedge funds try to profit on tiny differences between the futures price and the actual bond price. And it's a very small amount that they make per trade or per bond, but the leverage that they're doing as much as 50 or 100 times is insanity. And so what you're seeing when volatility spikes like we saw, those trades can break down very fast, and these funds were forced to unwind or dump their treasuries onto the market, which drove rates higher and at the same time killed liquidity. But that's just one part of it too. You and I have talked a lot about the bigger issue, and that is countries that have been around the world have been offshore or off-putting or dumping their treasuries. Net, since 2014, there's been no new central bank purchases of our treasuries. Sure, they bought some, but there's been more selling by the central banks than by buying. So when you add that to the equation, on top of these funds that are massively, massively over leveraged in a game that they thought could never possibly lose, well, you see what can happen. And it presents this deal where, look, if hedge funds are being forced to sell and central banks are being forced to sell, you're talking about yields spiking way faster than anyone could expect. And then that puts serious pressure on the Fed. Let's not forget, if rates are surging and inflation's still hanging around or deficits are exploding, all of these things seem to be happening all at once. Well, their options become pretty darn well limited real fast. And that's where we are right now. Do we lower? Do we hold tight? We were talking about raising forever. Now we're talking about lowering again. Where are we in a system where inflation is still roaring? Inflation's not going away. This is a breaking of the world's safest market, and that's when everything else begins to shake. So this could become very dangerous very quickly. We're not there yet, And I'm not signaling the alarm bells, but you see just how fragile it is, where just a less than 60 basis point move can break some of the biggest hedge funds in the world. Yeah, it's a precarious position. We're seeing it at the highest level, of course, with deliveries on the COMEX and central bank purchases and family office purchases. The largest deliveries onto the COMEX, JP Morgan delivering $4 billion in gold for a customer in February. So big money has noticed it. Retail hasn't yet. So ultimately, yes, I do think retail will be late to the party. But that's why there's a whole school of investing ideology, Jesse, like wave theory, Elliott wave, Kondratiev wave, based on human emotions. And so when you talk about, are we anywhere near the top in gold? I mean, crap, the retail investing public has zero exposure to this, or as Rick Rule would say, 0.5% is what he believes for the entire financial matrix. And I think he says from Joe and Jane Sixpack to the Harvard Endowment Fund. So yeah, we have a long way to go. And that acceleration comes when the retail public wakes up. Miners are finally getting a little love. I mean, it's crazy how they've done nothing and gold has roared. They're still trading like gold is $1,700, not anywhere near its all-time highs where it should be. And that disconnect for many has been very frustrating. What's the old adage that the market can stay irrational and we can all stay solvent? And you're right, a lot profitable now, especially with oil pulling back. Their all-in sustaining cost has come way down. Margins are widening. Some of them are printing cash. But it's like the market's still stuck, kind of like the retail side. The market's still stuck in this old narrative where miners are high risk, high cost operations. That's not the case anymore. But, I think in the end, capital always chases returns. And once you see the broader investor, the retail public, realize that these companies are throwing off cash flow, the sky's the limit. This is, again, when you talk about asymmetrical risk reward, low downside, high upside, the miners are people would be crazy not to own some. And I've always looked at the miners, Jesse, in my portfolio in the form of a pyramid, where the base of your pyramid, 60-70% would be cash, would be gold, paid for real estate. The middle portion of your pyramid, maybe 20-30%, would be, let's say, 6-month or less duration treasuries throwing off 4 or 5%, utility stocks throwing off a dividend, something like that, a little riskier, a little more return. And the top 10% would be the cryptocurrencies, the mining shares, et cetera. The theory is you lose everything on the top 10. You make nothing on the middle 20 or 30. As long as the base of your pyramid is not moving backwards, you don't move backwards, just making your slow, steady growth. But in a perfect world, yeah, you can make more money on that top 10% than the bottom 90 underneath you. So while we don't want to invert our pyramid to speculation, there is tremendous upside, certainly in the mining shares, which have not kept up with gold's run. I think they will, though. That I do believe. If enough countries start settling trade in their local currencies, especially if they're backed by or anchored to gold, even loosely, yeah, you're looking at a major challenge to the fiat system. And again, much like most people who have talked about this have said, it won't happen overnight, but it is. You are watching the foundation shift. These are the countries that have been buying all of the gold, and these are the countries that produce all of the gold. These are the countries that have developed the technology, whether it be the bridge technology or others that have come into being recently. They're the ones who not only understand what gold really is, accumulate it all, produce it all, but now have trading mechanisms in place to trade cross-border with free from the SWIFT interference. And like I think what this really is the BRICS understand. Yes, they want to break free from Western financial dominance. They want to break free from the dollar. They also want to break free from the price setting mechanisms. The fact that COMEX and the LBMA, which really are rather, let's just call them fugazi, right? What they are very fractionalized. They are very rehypothecated. And if everyone stood for delivery, overnight the markets would blow up. There is far more paper on the Western exchanges than there are bars behind it. as we were mentioning earlier, the LBMA, which is a T+1 settlement. In 3 days, you should have your metal, or it should be on its way to you, is now T+8 weeks. Well, they're saying it's a lack of manpower and trucks, or is it? You got guys like David Jansen saying that they trade 2.9 billion ounces of silver per day, 3.5 times the annual global mine supply. And behind those 2.9 billion ounces are only 65 million ounces of physical silver. There's a problem there if everyone stands for delivery. And the same thing is true with gold. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 36 million ounces, I think, is the number of gold that is standing behind 280 or 90 million ounces in spot contracts. Really? So if every one of those contracts stand for delivery, what happens? And maybe that's why they pumped the BRICS. And the BRICS, as I've been saying on your show and others for 4 years, have been exploiting this by slowly. This is the little by little part. This is why I love the logarithmic decay, little by little, then all at once, because what we have been seeing for 4 years is the little by little by little by little draining of the exchanges, starting with the LBMA and moving all around the globe. You even see the draining of the Shanghai Metals Exchange, but that's for a different reason. That's because the Chinese are telling their people through the Shanghai Metals Exchange to save in gold and silver, and they are state-sponsored savings programs, so there are lots of deliveries. But on a bigger level, to see the LBMA be massively drained of its gold and silver, and the COMEX, to see a change in the T+1 to T+8 weeks as a result of all of this demand, standing against a fractional Fugazi system. And by the way, that's the same environment that the Hunt brothers realized in 1980. Way more contracts than there are bars. Let's buy up all the contracts and stand for delivery. Really, that became a problem, and the COMEX did what it could to save its own by changing the rules. But the LBMA is not an exchange like the COMEX is. There's no central clearing authority. There's no exchange to make rules. It is an over-the-counter, peer-to-peer trading network, much less regulated, much more opaque. And you're talking some of the biggest banks in the world are really in a very, very dangerous, I say, existential threat position by being wickedly short, without the ability to get those bars for delivery if requested. And what's really different now more than ever before is the standing for delivery. And when I started talking about this in 2020, I would say, look, less than 1% of all these COMEX contracts ever stood for delivery. Same thing is true on LBMA, not a lot. And now all of a sudden, this is the Achilles heel. This is what the BRICS countries understood. This is what the Trump administration understands. This is why we've seen north of 50 million ounces of gold delivered since November. This is why the U.S. has become a net importer of gold since November. This is why we're seeing the largest deliveries of gold and silver into the COMEX ever